I'm very happy to cheer you here, to have you all. This is the very first time for us to have not only our colleagues of Daphne, the Daphne network, but to have our members that we refer to as the moms, or the members of the Daphne. And we're really happy to have you all here with us, and thank you for being with us. We want this first workshop and exchange to be as dynamic, as nice, as thrilling as possible, and as really to provide you all kind of opportunity to really work your networks through Europe and exchange on your knowledge. I'll be very short because we have a running schedule, and I think we were already running slightly late. But I wanted to thank, first of all, the Fondations INSEAD and the INSEAD institution for receiving us here. I think it's going to be very entertaining and wonderful to be surrounded by students with their very agile way of thinking that we have to match up. And so that's going to be a good challenge for us who haven't been to school very recently, for most of us. So we'll see what we can do on that. I also wanted to say a few words of to thank Roza and Rosa Gallego, who's our chair of the network of the Daphne network, and James McGowan, who have who is our coordinator. He's my chef. Let's make it simple. And who has provided such a wonderful work. And also all the teams of the different delegations that have put into this organization lots of themselves, and great knowledge, great addition, and I think all the teams, everyone was really joining in this work, and so really thank you to them. Wanted to also thank my team, and so especially Anne Fleury, who has been probably in contact with all of you already, for the work she has done organizing this also. And all this is always possible also because some foundations decide to help us and to provide support, and I'm really thankful. So I wanted to tell you they'll tell you of themselves in time. They're here, they're with us, and they'll be sharing their words and their understanding. But I wanted to thank the BNP Paribas Foundation, who has been from the very beginning close to the Centre Français des Fondations, and is doing a fantastic work and work more and more European. So I think they have, I don't remember how many foundations you have in Europe, but quite a lot. And then the ADP means Aéroport de Paris, and I hope everyone had a safe and happy journey through airports for most of you, some through train, but mostly the planes. And the Fondation Michelin also that has provided us support, that is also in our board, thank you, in our board, and the Fondation EDF equally in our board, supporting very, very wonderfully our work. And last but not last, PSR Foundation, and so thanks to them, we've also managed to organize a day which is not only will be a moment of exchange and of discovery and hard work, but also a moment of rejoicing and also experiencing the beauty of Paris, I hope, and of Paris, of Fontainebleau, I meant, of the Château de Fontainebleau, where we will be tonight. I'm sorry for that. There was just that's lightning. Just one thing I wanted to do maybe is we could see maybe just to spot who's from where, because maybe I can ask the French foundations the French people to put an arm up so that you see who's there as French foundations who represent and that you can get in contact with. Then we can have the journals up. This one. Someone will still arrive, we know. The Polish. Yeah. The English, the UK. Okay, wonderful. Who did I not say? The Swiss, of course. Very wonderful. Thank you for being so numerous. They were Portugal. Oh, look at it. So there's something slightly wrong. At the end of the day, we want to all spread through the group, right? And the Spanish. Yeah, they're still very much an organization together. Did I forget? Hungary. Wonderful, I'm sorry. And Italian, did I say? Yes, that's right. So that's, or did I not say someone? Yeah? Netherlands, we have, she can't make it. So be all very welcome, and I give the floor to Rosa, who's chairing the Daphne Network.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. And I have to make it very short. So I will not repeat the thank yous that have been given by Beatrice already, and please take them from me and from Daphne too. I only want to thank all of you for making the effort to be here today to this very first activity of this kind, and I will explain why. I've been asked by some people already at lunchtime, so what is Daphne? And I hope I get this question quite often. It's a mythological creature, it's a European funding scheme, what is it? Well, it is an organization that you actually belong to. Daphne stands for Donors and Foundations Networks in Europe, and is the network comprised by the 25 National Association of Foundations and Donors forums that already exist or at the moment exist in Europe. So the French Foundation Center, the Spanish Association of Foundations, Swiss Foundations, and so on. So in a way, you're all members of Daphne, and I want to welcome you here today. Daphne is still an informal network, but for the last 2 years, we've been going under extraordinary development in which we have moved from a loose network that met twice a year and have occasional activities to a network that has a sound work plan based on 4 main pillars: network and synergies, data and research, communication and advocacy. And our aim is to create a dynamic, effective and sustainable connection or mechanism of connection among the National Association of Foundations and the Donors Forums. In our vision document that we back up last May, that we approved last May, we acknowledge the fact that foundations and donors are operating in a dynamic and a challenging environment. And I quote from that document because I think it's meaningful today. Increasing complexity is arising for more public and political scrutiny, reducing public expenditure, and the closing space for civil society. All said in a context of persistent societal needs, as well as the emergence of new socioeconomic, environmental, and political issues. I would like to say here that this vision statement was approved in May when none of the very surprising political results have started to happen. This environment will require evolution of both the operating environment and the practice of philanthropy, ranging from collaboration to the development of progressive approaches on the application of new ways of using private assets for public good. This corporate foundation exchange is a good example of the power of networks. From the initial suggestion of one of our members, the French Association of Foundations, from using the knowledge of other Daphne members that were already working on the field with working groups in corporate foundations, and benefiting from the convening role of national associations, we have managed to gather here over 50 European foundations coming from 9 different countries. This exchange is thought as a unique opportunity to debate some of the topics that are relevant for you in your special characteristics as corporate foundations, and to learn from the experiences of others at European level. But it will also serve as national associations to find out and to gather knowledge of what your needs are, so that we can devise ways to better support your work. Could be done by changes in the operating environment, but also by creating connections among you and among all those other foundations that couldn't be here today. I very much hope that this event is the starting point for something that Daphne is aiming for, that we have started calling providing connections among foundations and donors in Europe. This is one of the roles that we want to play. Welcome to INSEAD, and make sure that among all of us, we make the title of this event come true. It's a knowledge exchange, so it's up to us to exchange knowledge. Thank you very much and welcome.
I will stand up because I've not prepared a long speech. So, my name is Eric Ponsolet, so I'm the Director General of Administration of INSEAD. I'm also in charge of the Fondations INSEAD. So, I just want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to INSEAD. Welcome on our campus. On behalf of our Dean, Professor Gabrioff, I would like to say that we are very pleased and honored to welcome this very first meeting of European Foundations on this topic of corporate foundations, which is very interesting. You probably perhaps know INSEAD, so we are a management school, a business school. Of course, we have a business school for the world. But I'm not going to embark into a presentation of INSEAD, that's not the topic of today. I just want to say a few words, which is that at the very beginning of INSEAD, 60 years ago, there was an idea, there was a dream. And this dream was coming from 4 students, a group of students, inspired by one of their professors at Harvard Business School. And they came back from Harvard and we decided to say, why don't we try to create the first MBA program outside of the US, but more important, to launch the very first European integrated higher education institution. And they came to Fontainebleau and they decided to create INSEAD because behind that there was a big idea, there was a big dream. They thought that if we put in the same amphi, such as today, students coming from all Europe who don't speak the same language, who have been fighting in a war just 10 years before, and we ask them to study together, to work together, to know each other, and then to continue to do business together, perhaps it will be a small contribution to peace in Europe. So that was their dream. So since that, INSEAD has evolved a lot, so we are no longer European, we are global now. We have 3 campuses, including in Singapore and in Abu Dhabi. But we continue to have the same principles. So meaning that in our classrooms, we continue to have a kind of quota. We don't have more than 12% of one nationality in every class. We have more Indian students at INSEAD, even today in Fontainebleau, than French students, for example. And we continue to develop this kind of diversity and this kind of dream that indeed, by studying together and doing business together, in fact, it contributes to peace in the world. So that's a big dream. On top of that, I would like to say that INSEAD is also a foundation, so we have a foundation, and this foundation has 2 goals. One is to finance scholarships, because when you want to attract students from countries where the purchasing power is very different, of course, it's extremely difficult to find such studies. So we distribute several millions of scholarships per year in order to attract students who don't have the capacity to pay themselves, and also research, which is very important. I'm going to give the mic to my colleague, Professor Greg Smith, but before that, I would like just to wish you an excellent meeting, excellent discussions, and perhaps if let's have the same dream for us, meaning that if the foundations in Europe can speak together, work together, perhaps it will contribute a bit to make this world and Europe a bit more concrete, a bit more human and peaceful, and that's very important, and I think this is still very, very important agenda today. So, I was speaking about research. Yes, we are a research institution, and this is essentially based on our faculty, permanent faculty. We have 150 permanent professors who pursue their research agenda. I looked at the list and we have nobody working on corporate foundations. I'm very sorry for that. So that's very too specific for a topic, but I've asked one of our colleagues, Professor Craig Smith, who is going to say just a few words. And Professor Smith, who is just behind me, is the INSEAD Chair Professor of Ethics and Social Responsibility. He's also the Academic Director of the Corporate Social Responsibility and Ethics Research Group in one of our research centers, which is called the INSEAD Social Innovation Center. He has been teaching and professors in other schools, London Business School, Georgetown, Harvard Business School, and he's doing a lot of research in the domain of business, society, business ethics, and so on. I'm not going to read the full bio because it will be very long. He has published a lot of books and research papers also on this topic. So I wish you an excellent meeting, and I'm just giving the micro to my colleague.
So good afternoon and welcome to INSEAD. I'm going to say a few words about corporate social responsibility and sustainability and how there might be some relation to corporate foundations in doing that. My work, as Eric indicated, is in the areas of ethics, corporate social responsibility and sustainability. In fact, I'm particularly interested in corporate accountability, how society can hold corporations to account for their social and environmental impacts by, for example, market-based incentives such as consumers, consumer preference, consumer boycotts. Eric came to me and said, can you say a few words to the Corporate Foundations Conference? As he's already indicated, we don't have anybody on the faculty doing work on corporate foundations. And I was thinking, well, what do I know about corporate foundations? Well, I know, and I'm very grateful for the fact that the INSEAD Foundation supports my research. But I'm also increasingly hearing about corporate foundations in relation to that research, and particularly in relation to the work I do on CSR and sustainability. And what I'm going to do is mention what I see as the connection between the two, and highlight what I think could be an opportunity, possibly even an emerging trend, at least as I see it coming from CSR. It may well be what I'm going to say is very familiar to some of the people in the room, but at least coming from CSR, the role of corporate foundations is a relatively new development. Let me first of all say a few words just by way of introduction to corporate social responsibility and sustainability. So CSR is not a new idea. In fact, you could go back to the immediate aftermath of the Industrial Revolution and find evidence of companies engaging in what we might call CSR today. So William Hesketh Lever, for example, the founder of Unilever, was somebody who was acutely aware of the fact that people had a shortened lifespan by virtue of the fact of poor hygiene. And by introducing soap and promoting hand washing, he was able to make a contribution to addressing that very real social problem. And in fact, soap today, in some more remote parts of the world, is still sold on the basis that it can save people's lives. Now, William Hesketh Lever wouldn't have called what he did corporate social responsibility, but in many respects, what he did out of a sense of enlightened self-interest is what we think of as corporate social responsibility today. If we move forward to the late 20th century, CSR got something of a bad name, in part because it became largely associated with philanthropy in many companies. And 10 or 12 years ago, I was writing against this trend, and for example, in an op-ed in the Financial Times, wrote that CSR needs to get out of a corporate ghetto. The corporate social responsibility in many companies at that time was very much a marginal and marginalized activity, a department that got out some good stories about what the company was doing, but meanwhile, it was business as usual. Today, I'm pleased to say, there is much more recognition that corporate social responsibility is something more fundamental, that it's about the company's footprint on society, on the environment, about its social and environmental impacts, and taking responsibility for those impacts. If you look to various surveys of business leaders on the topic, you see evidence of this. So Accenture, with the UN Global Compact, conducted a survey of over 700 CEOs in 2010, asking them how important are sustainability issues to the future success of your business. 93% said that it is important or very important. And in fact, today when we think of CSR, and certainly when we teach it, we talk about it as being a strategic activity. We talk about strategic CSR, strategic sustainability, addressing, if you like, a business case for giving attention to stakeholders and how they might respond to the company's impact. Another term that's gained some currency of late is the idea of creating shared value, that businesses can create social and economic value. And just to give you one example from my research, a project that I currently have underway is looking at employees and whether employees of businesses care about corporate social responsibility. And so in a field experiment conducted in an online marketplace for odd jobs, this is known as Mechanical Turk. People can go there and they can find work that may only last for a few minutes and get paid for doing that work. In that context, my co-author, Doug Frank, a former faculty member here at INSEAD, and myself offered people 2 jobs. And we offered them a job with an organization that they had already evaluated as socially responsible, and conversely with an organization that was less responsible in their judgment. Now those participants, those employees that we offered these real jobs to, had different offers of pay for those jobs. So we manipulated the pay that they could receive. And in fact, we found that 49% of our participants were willing to sacrifice 12 to 18% of their income, the real income they were going to receive from us for doing the work, in preference for the socially responsible organization. So seemingly, this research supports the idea that companies that are more socially responsible can attract people who care about those issues. But the win-win that example illustrates isn't always present. So it's not always possible for companies to find a business case for addressing CSR and sustainability, for addressing their social and environmental impacts, at least in the long term. At least in the short term. And even where companies are responsible for those impacts, that idea of some sort of business benefit from giving them attention isn't always realizable. And this is where I think there is a role emerging for corporate foundations, and possibly even an emerging trend. And I've come across a number of examples. One I'm going to mention just very briefly is the example of Skandia. Skandia, as you may know, is a Swedish insurer and pension fund. And in its words, it dared to act long-term in the presence of the long-term responsibility that it perceived itself as having as an insurance company. What did it do? Well, it introduced a wellness campaign for free to its customers. And this was something it gave away, it was something that was costly to do, but it was dramatically successful. It managed to lower healthcare claims by giving people information about wellness, about good health, such as improved diet or increased physical activity. And the key metric that Skandia was using was the reduction, was a measure of sick leave. and they managed to secure a 56% reduction in sick leave over 10 years, reducing illness in the population, but also reducing costs and indeed premiums for their customers. Now that's what the company did. What is the connection with corporate foundations? Well, the idea for this initiative came from the work of the Scandia Foundation, Ideas for Life. Ideas for Life have been working on ill health, working on preventing ill health, even developing an ill health calculator, believe it or not. And that work enabled the company, Scandia the company, to take the gamble and to go out and launch that wellness campaign. So what do I see here then as the opportunity? Well, I think that there's an opportunity for foundations to do what corporations cannot do, and in three ways. Firstly, to work on social and environmental issues with a truly long-term perspective. You can have that long-term commitment. Secondly, given that what you do is specified by statute, protected by statute, in doing that work, you can do it with perhaps greater legitimacy, certainly greater independence perhaps than a corporation can do, greater honesty even than perhaps a corporation can do. And thirdly, you can stay the course, continue this work because of the protection that the work has, given the nature of a foundation, when times are tough for the corporation. And so in another example, I'm going tomorrow actually to India to develop a case study and some other research around Tata Motors. Tata Motors as a corporation is having a difficult financial time at the moment. But the Tata Foundation that is involved in doing some of the projects that I'm going to look at, skills development in particular in India, is able to continue that work because that work's protected. So staying the course then is this third benefit, I think, to what you can do in this space. You can't have senior management, you can't have CEOs cutting the funding when economic times are difficult. So in conclusion, I see a potentially growing and important role for foundations to address social and environmental issues in ways that complement and yet can go beyond strategic CSR and sustainability by corporations. You can do the things that benefit the business and, of course, society as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm James McGowan from Daphne. Rosa introduced me earlier on, and I'm going to help guide you through the next couple of days. And as Rosa said, and this also in their introductions, that this is very much a knowledge exchange, and we've tried to create as dynamic an environment as possible to allow that to happen. So you'll have to run with us a little bit and engage as best you can. Before I introduce the next speakers, if we could just, I want to, sorry, just to make you aware of something, but also remind you that this is a current topic, and just in relation really to what we heard from Professor Smith there, this is an area of interest that is still current as to what is the difference between CSR and the role of foundations, the dynamic environment, and that's the sort of meat of the subject we're going to get into over the next few days. And there was an article published in Alliance just last week on exactly that topic, suggesting is this the sunset period for foundations in a dynamic world where CSR and the whole approach to a complete corporate responsibility where you can have all of the impact of the company on both on the economic and social side, rather than having something external as a separate entity, as a foundation that carries out the nice stuff and has a linkage with the foundation. And it's argued quite well by Andrew Milner in the Alliance piece. But why I put that up is that this event is being covered by Alliance, and Steffen and Teresa from SEPS in Basel will be writing on this. So I just want you to be aware of that, I hope it doesn't inhibit any of the discussion and your contributions, but I think it's better, and we did talk about this beforehand, that we make the thinking here and the learning able to be shared by a wider environment. You will have plenty of opportunity to discuss amongst yourselves, of course, but I think it's better that we have that, and it's tremendous that Alliance, which is the sort of premier publication, both hard copy and online, not that I'm pushing it, for Foundations, is covering this event and has an interest in it. So it will be reported on in Alliance Extra later this month. So the other thing is Twitter. Please feel free to tweet. We have a hashtag of CFKE, hashtag CFKE, Corporate Foundation Knowledge Exchange. Okay, so please feel free to tweet. And let's keep moving. We're coming to a very important part of it, which is really, I think, going to set us up in terms of our thinking with presentations from experts that will give us a sense of what the foundation world is, the corporate foundation world globally, and quite specifically in France. So if I could invite Amanda and Anne to the table, please. Would you rather be at the podium or sitting down?
Actually, I can find. No, I'll be standing up. I'm short. Rather than hiding behind this. Okay, can you hear me all right? Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, James. Well, I just wanted to start by saying a couple of things. Which, firstly, I need to just check how I make the slides. I wanted to say a couple of things right at the beginning. Firstly, I must apologise, as you probably can hear, I'm not at my physical best, I'm afraid. I do have a rather bad cold. For those of you who have been sitting near me, I do hope I'm not going to cough and splutter. I'm going to try very hard not to. I'm no longer infectious because I've been like this for a long time, it feels like. But it sadly means that I won't be able to stay with you for more than a few hours today. I was going to stay until tomorrow, and I am really genuinely very sorry about that. Secondly, I will be speaking as a founder director of Corporate Citizenship, which is a CSR and sustainability consultancy, and I don't have to explain what that is because Professor Smith just did that extremely well. And we work with businesses, but with some corporate foundations as well, because I recognise the distinction that we do have corporate foundations as clients. But I also am, of course, chair of ACF in the UK, a member organisation of Daphne, so there are a lot of familiar faces here, I'm delighted to say. And I'm drawing upon my own experience as a trustee of the Bearing Foundation in the UK, which is no longer a corporate foundation, by the way, but also as a trustee of a corporate foundation of a bank many years ago. So I've seen it from as a trustee of foundations who are on both sides of the line, if I may say. So why did I particularly want to get off my sick bed to be here? Well, it's because I think this is a really significant event. Because, to my mind, corporate foundations are a growing and important part of the foundation movement. And a very important part, therefore, of the independent funding scene. And if you were in the US probably you might go to a corporate foundation event because they've recognised the role of corporate foundations for a number of years. And we are increasingly doing that here in Europe. But as I understand it, this is the first time that we've had a Europe-wide corporate foundation conference. And I think that's very important and significant because, as I said, this is a growing part of the sector. And we have a huge amount, I think, to learn from one another. So with no more ado, I will move on. Just check that's working. Yes, it is. Now, corporate citizenship has done a number of research reports over the years looking at corporate foundations. We started back in 2006 looking at corporate foundations in the UK and have increasingly moved on to look at the global scene, because this is not just about North America and Europe, this is very much a global picture. And in fact, I want to talk about our latest piece of research specifically in a moment, which is called Game Changers, which we're launching today. And I'm going to tell you a bit more about that. And a number of you here actually contributed, I believe, to the survey for that report. If I could go back to where we started in the UK back in 2006, when we wanted to look at this scene, recognising that actually corporate foundations were beginning to have some interesting characteristics. We discovered that actually there was no way of telling how many, because in the UK at least, they are not registered separately from other foundations, or actually from the general charitable sector. So we literally had to go through the Charity Commission, our regulators, register to identify the numbers at the time. And that has led us down the path, as I say, of looking at other aspects, because there were some very interesting findings early on, which we've been tracking over a period of time. Now, I know that the situation in the UK is not necessarily true in other parts of Europe, although I believe in Germany, and we don't have many, but I think that there also is no legal definition of corporate foundations separate from other foundations. But here in France there is. There's a particularly well-developed legal framework, which I think has 8 different categories. I tread carefully. Those who French foundations will know better than I. So there are some European countries where the corporate benefactor or funder is recognised as being separate part of the legal registration. But I think in most European countries that is not the case. And I must acknowledge the fact that in Poland I know we've done a lot of research in this area, because we're not by any means the only ones who are recognising the importance of this, and you've looked across Europe as well. So if I could just, if you will indulge me, I am British after all, so I have to, I'm afraid, look at the UK. But just to give you a few facts about the UK, we have of the top 300 foundations, and this comes from the ACF publication Giving Trends, which comes out every year. There is a contribution of 2.7 billion, or 15% of the total sort of independent funding generally. We identified, as in corporate citizenship, 140 corporate foundations operating in the UK. So as you can see, not a significant proportion, and that was back in 2013. We now, as ACF, have started acknowledging corporate foundations, so we do actually track those statistics separately now, as well as family foundations. But what is significant and has been shown in this year's research is that corporate foundations have seen an uplift since 2010. As I said, it's a growth area for foundations. And when you think about it, that's not particularly surprising, because new foundations are inevitably going to be established by those who have wealth. And those who have wealth are either going to be individuals, individual entrepreneurs, or companies. However, of course, in the past, there has been a question about whether companies would wish to continue to fund foundations separately for all the reasons that Professor Smith outlined. There's been a general integration of this kind of activity into company behaviour. But actually, what research has shown is that that's not the case. The foundation model, the corporate foundation model, is increasingly popular, and there are more being registered, not just in the UK, but across the globe. We at Corporate Citizenship get inquiries from companies across all continents, including Africa as well, who are interested in setting up a foundation. Now, there are certain regional trends, and I'm going to try and highlight some of those as I move on to look at the research. So the research that I'm talking about today, which is called Game Changers, and I do have some copies with me, although I should stress it is available on our website, is looking at a particular aspect of corporate foundation activity. And what we've called game changing, you could call social change, where there is a significant intervention to bring about social change. Those who are wanting to make a significant difference, intervention in a particular area. This is something that we've picked up in previous research as well as from our own experiences, that some of the newer foundations, but not just the newer foundations, are increasingly interested in having a foundation for a particular reason, and that isn't necessarily to establish a grant-giving arm, which may be supporting communities, which is very legitimate and right thing to do, but because they want to make a particular intervention in an issue. And again, Professor Smith talked about that a bit. I think that one of the reasons that that's happening is because the foundation model allows companies to create a safe space for them to, well, at a very practical level, be able to invest for the long term. I.e., when you put money into a foundation, it's ring-fenced and therefore cannot necessarily change with the changing priorities of the company and the economy. And we all know that those are realities facing business. So they can actually create a longer-term fund. But also, there are many NGOs who would rather engage with the foundation than directly with a company. And the companies may well have what are perceived to be reputational issues. I mean, now many companies have reputational issues. I used to work for a bank, and you know, there are many people who now work for a bank, and there's some of you are associated with banking, who will know that it's not necessarily the thing that you want to talk about now, which is incredible because banks are part of our society, but they've made themselves rather unpopular. Pharmaceuticals, we used to love pharmaceuticals, but now they are seen with a lot of scepticism. So many of them see having a foundation as being a good way of establishing a safe space to be able to engage with NGOs and to be able to develop new ideas, to be able to use them to, again, as we heard earlier, almost like R&D for developing new ideas, which perhaps in the company is much harder to do because the challenges of the economic variance that a company faces, it's not always possible to engage in the long term in that way. Now, our research was global, as I said, and that's partly because it reflects the nature of our business now, corporate citizenship, but also because the corporate foundation model is increasingly seen, in our experience, as part of the global language of business. I can't put it any other way than that. It is generally understood in virtually every country that you can go in, and so many of our larger companies, of course, now are global. So it's language which is understood and enables a company to be able to operate at a global level in terms of what it wants to do in social intervention. We had a great response from European countries, so thank you again. Austria, Czech Republic, France, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, Portugal, Slovakia, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United Kingdom. So, although this is only a snapshot, And as I often say, and I know this through my ACF work, if you meet one foundation, you meet one foundation. And it is, you know, in this sector particularly is very, very individualistic. And that is true of corporate foundations as well. But it is possible to pick up trends, and I think that's what we've done. So the most significant is probably the question that we've been asking since, I think, 2008, and last asked in 2013, is how integrated a corporate foundation is with its company. Now, I should absolutely stress that we understand that corporate foundations are legally independent bodies. So this model of independent foundations to integrated foundations is not meant to imply legal independence, but operational independence. So for foundations who may, for instance, an independent foundation may employ its own staff, have an endowment, and really, other than perhaps carrying the name of the original founding company, will really not have much more of a relationship with it, through to a much more integrated model where the company employs those who are working for the foundation, probably houses them, may well have the majority, if not all of the trustees, who are on the board of the foundation. So that's the most integrated model. And when we last asked that question in 2013, 58% said that their giving strategy was linked to the business focus. Now, and this is a global statistic, 73% said, and that's in a relatively short space of time, but I think that reflects a change of new foundations and a lot of reviews that have happened within foundations have said that they are now more closely aligned to the company. By the way, in Europe, that figure was 76%. And in fact, you'll see this if you download the research from our website, you will see that the only area of the globe was Asia, where you have a very different model still, partly because of family companies still, and they tend to be much more independent. There are a lot of other factors at play there, but Europe was ahead on that. So what do we mean by game changers? Well, the characteristic of game changers were, and I should, by the way, I'm standing here claiming this research. My colleague Kathy Muscadini actually carried out this research, as you will see if you download it. So all credit to her. She has actually worked for a corporate foundation as well. Kathy identified a number of different characteristics, starting with business acumen. And by that means leveraging the expertise and knowledge of the parent company. But they go one step further than necessarily just, important though that is, engaging employee volunteering and in-kind donations. It's moving on to looking at developing products that address a social need, perhaps to deploy highly trained expertise and skills to a particular program. Strategic alignment perhaps is easier to understand. It's really tapping into the expertise and the business strategy of the company, or potentially the geography of the company as well. So it's more of a easily understood, as I said, alignment. Focus, not unusual, I know, because there are a number of other foundations who increasingly are focusing, but it seems to be a particular characteristic of these corporate foundations, a small number of defined focus areas that where business acumen can be applied, leverage from the company can be applied. Engaging delivery partners, communities, governments and others to really be able to create impactful solutions, often to global problems, and you will all be familiar with this, the SDGs, the global goals, where for the first time we actually have an explicit recognition of the role of business in addressing global issues. Many will do that through their foundations. But I talked about impact, and certainly a move towards impact measurement is very important. However, there is a shortfall, as I will come on in a moment to say, between those who believe they should be measuring impact and those that actually do. And then sustainable finance. So thinking about investments as a tool for change. This is something that the foundation movement generally, I know from my own personal experience, is beginning to look at. And many corporate foundations who are themselves having to think about their own ESG issues are thinking, where are our investments in terms of our foundations as well? So thinking about social impact created through different forms of investments. So, the statistics. 65% of the foundations worldwide are thinking about the new product or service that I mentioned. 17% said they're already doing this, but in Europe, 32% said they are already doing it, as opposed to thinking of it. Strategic alignment, again, this is higher in Europe, hence, it is much more common sense, you would all understand. Again, focus slightly higher in Europe, 44% as opposed to 40% globally. And lastly, in Europe, 58% of corporate foundations measure wider social benefit, but 78% said that corporate foundations should measure the impacts of their programs. So they're obviously not doing that. You'll all be interested in the challenges, but they'll be familiar to you. Legal requirements certainly is one of those, and I think will be, as businesses think about engaging their corporate foundations in interventions where they're using product development expertise, it moves to a line that they cannot step over. That's where the legal requirements may end up being a barrier to what they wish to achieve. Now, this is looked at actually in the Alliance magazine article that James mentioned. It's an interesting issue. We're living in an age when corporate foundations are on the up, so to speak, but will they eventually have lived out their time, because there will be new models coming forward? Lack of funds, well, you will all know, that is a big challenge, because business is very challenged at the moment. And reluctance from trustees, buy-in from the parent company are all related really to how much funding a corporate foundation may have. And there's a range of expectations from stakeholders. Focus sounds easy, but it's not when you have the range of stakeholders that the funding company has. There will always be demands upon the foundation. I say that from practical and personal experience. So those are some of the challenges. And it brings it back to why I think today is so important. Because I think those are challenges that we undoubtedly share across Europe. And I think that's why it's important that we do share our experiences, even though there are different legal definitions or different cultural differences. It's what makes Europe great. Let's ignore Brexit for the moment. I believe it's what makes Europe great, and I think we have an awful lot to share from one another. So I'm looking forward to, sadly, the brief time that I have with you, because I know you're going to get an awful lot from the next 2 days. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you very much. If you don't mind, we'll keep going with move to Anne's presentation, and we'll have time for a discussion with everybody towards the end. Already there's very useful issues being raised there, but let's now drill down, having looked at a global European perspective, more specifically to hear of the situation in France.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. this afternoon to talk about corporate foundations. I am Anne Ramonda, working in EY, dedicated to the not-for-profit and social economy departments of EY. I do both audit intervention, financial intervention, and also some advisory services to this sector. During 2016, we published a second edition of a panorama of foundations and endowments created by corporate enterprises. We did this panorama with a French NGO, Les Entreprises pour la Cité, which gathers more or less 230 companies who intend to be involved in citizenship. And this NGO seeks to assist their members, their companies, in their social commitments. So how did we perform this study? First of all, we inventoried the status of foundation in France around June 2016, thanks to literature research, and also thanks to works performed by the Fondations de France, who is looking after the evolution of foundation in France. We also made an online survey towards more or less more than 6,000 foundations. And then we also conducted interviews of six top managers in corporate foundation. Their corporate foundation are written down. So what did we observe? Among 70 foundations who accepted to respond to our survey, we found out more than 50% are very large companies, meaning more than 5,000 employees. Then we have an increase of a medium-sized company from 200 and 5,000 employees. They represent 35% of our respondents. And then we have also an increase in smaller companies. They reach 13% of respondents to this survey, which is a quite big increase compared to 2 years ago. So if we observe and analyze the number of foundations created in France as of today, we have more or less 4,700 foundations created in France. 20% of foundation has been created by corporate enterprise, and 9% of the endowments. As you know, we have a lot of different legal statutes for foundation in France, and we observe that corporate enterprises have created a specific legal status, which is a Fondations d'entreprise, corporate foundation. More or less, it represents 360 foundations with this specific legal status. Then we have 116 foundations sous égide. It means that they have no legal personality. They are under the aegis of another foundation. Then we observe that 34 foundations are public benefit foundation, which is the more recognized, I would say, foundation as a public interest and public benefit foundation. So if I'm going to present you the key learnings of these studies. Key learnings that are summarized in 4 refocusing. Refocusing about strategy, but also refocusing to create and increase the social impact performance of these corporate foundations. we also observe refocusing on geographic territories in which corporate foundations do develop their actions. And then refocusing regarding communication. So I will go through these 4 refocusing points with you. First of all, regarding strategic refocusing. What we had observed between 2014, which was the first edition of this study, and 2016, is that as of today, 50% of the respondents to our studies declare that the corporate foundation is directly connected, operationally connected to the presidents of the company or the top management of the company. It is a quite important increase. It is more than 4 points increase compared to 2014. Then still 20% of respondents has this connected management connection with the Department of Communication, and then 1% on human resources. Then we observe that 50% are connected to the corporate social responsibility of the enterprise. And when we asked Foundation to answer the question about the link between their foundation and the corporate social responsibility, 68% of them answers that it is now very linked or even integrated to this corporate social responsibility. And as a result of these observations, we also observe that there are more employees in this corporate foundation. As of today, we have more or less 3 full-time equivalents, which is a significant increase compared to a few years ago, where we had half full-time equivalent or maybe 1 full-time equivalent only. It is also linked to an increase in the financial resources that the corporate enterprise allocates to the foundation. It represents an increase of 7%. But also we see that the sector of corporate foundation is also looking after more and more professional employees working in it. And we also observe that the average gross salaries has increased quite a lot during 2 years only, about 12%. Now, how did corporate foundation are selecting their projects? We observed also a significant change between our study 2 years ago, because now at the top of the list, we observed that foundation declared to have a proactive project church instead of call for project in a continuous flow submitted to a selection committee. So this is an important thing to share with you. 55% they have now a proactive process to select their project. And also 80% of them, compared to 72% years ago, want to fund partners or projects on the basis of multi-year and not only one-shot supporting funds. So it's really linked to the will to generalize partnership and have a co-constructive way to select projects and even to develop and concept the project. The The second focus observed in this study relates to the social impact performance. More and more corporate foundations want to focus on main areas. And at the top of the list, we found 3 main areas. The first of it is education. 58% of our respondents do involve themselves towards education. It is 12 points higher than 2 years ago. Then we have social welfare, including poverty and social exclusion, and employability for 43%. And of course, regarding employability, we observe also that the young people are the first and main beneficiary of the corporate foundation actions. The other thing is interesting to share with you is that 76% of respondents developed a cross-patronage through the project they fund, meaning that they cross thematics for looking after a better and increased impact, such as culture and education or employment in sport. More and more they want to cross thematics because it has proved that it has an increase in the social impact. Regarding employees, more and more, because now it represents 30%, which was not the case a few years ago, employees are solicited to be involved on their own skills, and meaning that they have skills in the company, and more corporate foundations solicit these skills, these business skills, to be involved in the project of the corporate foundation. It is now much more significant that the more traditional solidarity, such as fundraising or solidarity meetings, and most often they do both, meaning that more and more the enterprises want to bring their expertise, their business skills, business knowledge, with the possibility to apply them to the not-for-profit sector or for social projects. And another thing to notice, which is quite important, is that 15% of respondents declare that employees can be involved on their working time for the corporate foundation, against 28% on their free time, and 75% of respondents consider and solicit their employees in both ways, meaning that they can switch from working during their working times, or be involved during their working times, or during their free times. The third refocusing concern encroaching territories. It is a very, very significant observation in France, since we observed that 55% of corporate foundation respondents to our study do operate in France, and only 1% abroad, only abroad. So we have, and 44% both invest in social programs in France and abroad. So meaning that we can say that as of today, French corporate foundations do not act without being present and they're looking at an impact, a social impact in France. And this is maybe the most significant change observed since 2014, as 71% of endowments and foundations take into account geographical location to select and develop their projects. Lastly, focusing concern communication. The idea that the citation to have more people talk about you without talking oneself, meaning that as of today there is still the need of corporate foundation to increase the internal communication. And this is much more than the external communication. About 20% of respondents consider that they do have to communicate more and more internally to solicit more and more employees and make the action and the social mission of the foundation credible, and they continue the efforts to communicate internally much more than externally. But a large, of course, part of them, 87%, consider that communication has a positive impact on the company image. So that's why also we see this integration of corporate foundation strategy towards the corporate social responsibility. Now we observe also that regarding the tools and key communication tools, there is a large increase of social networks that represent, as of today, 69% of the preferred way to communicate. We still a quite large paper communication through brochures, about 80% as of today. So a few words also on a specific process that is increasing a lot is the evaluation process. To serve all these main focuses and mainly the strategic focus, we observe that evaluation is increasing. As of today, 64% of respondents confirm they have implemented an evaluation process of the project and program specifically, about 54%, or otherwise a global evaluation of the organization for about 10%, which is much more again than 2 years ago. We observe also that as of today, most of these evaluations are performed internally by employees or departments dedicated to this practice within the corporate foundation. Now, why evaluating? More and more the answer is we want to evaluate for better managing our project. This is really the main points that is observed in our study. 90% of respondents want to measure the social impact of their activities. They keep the results-oriented culture of the enterprise to the corporate foundation, and it is very important for them more and more to implement at the very first step of the corporate foundation an evaluation and methodology for that. They want, of course, to improve the project monitoring for 75% of them and report about this performance, which is very followed by top management of the company. And the little part we saw increasing regarding the reason why performing evaluation to make savings and be more efficient, even at the level of corporate foundation. More and more they want to do more with maybe less or same budget, So it is also a large increase of this answer, make savings and be more efficient. In other words, corporate foundation focused on performance-oriented patronage and less on ancient, I would say, historic way to perform patronage and just provide funds to organizations. They are much more proactive, and it's very interesting to see the link between the development of the corporate social responsibility of enterprises, which become more and more strategic to enterprise at the same as the corporate foundation are developing in France. Here is for the key learnings, and I think we have a few minutes also to receive your questions and have a few chats with you on these topics. Thank you for your attention.
And if you leave that key learnings up, that's useful. I promised you this would be interactive, so if you don't mind, I'm going to steal 10 minutes of the coffee break so that we can allow for your questions here, because I think with the two speakers, Amanda and Anne, we've got two experts here with a lot of knowledge, with research that's very current, and that can tell us a lot, and I'd really like to get some of your experience and the opportunity for your questions. We've heard really from three levels here. One sort of almost challenging the model, from the Andrew Milner article, with Professor Smith's suggestion that is there an alternative? Are the days numbered for corporate foundations, that it needs to be a more integrated model? Two, proof that in practice actually it's a growing model, that there is a need for this safe space, this separation of responsibility of the foundation from the corporation, albeit with a changing relationship, to then the very practice of some of the operational challenges, the refocusing that's taking place, that proves the discussions that we're going to be having over the next couple of days around the relationship between the foundation and the funding corporation, and how that impacts and influences governance, mission and practice, is the right topic to be discussing. So I want to hand it over to you now, for you to have the opportunity, particularly as Amanda, I'm so glad you made it. I got a message from Amanda yesterday saying, I'm not sure if I'm going to be fit to travel. So I was rehearsing her presentation, but I'm very glad that you've heard it directly from Amanda, and do not lose the opportunity to have the chance to ask questions. So there are moving microphones, Mario, and then
the Vice President of I Foundation. I Foundation belongs to a business school, Spanish business school. My question is for Anne Ramonda. In your presentation, you offered a slide with the main activities of corporate foundation. The first was education, the second was social welfare, and the third was employability. But research don't appear, doesn't exist in your presentation. Perhaps it's included in the sector of education, in the French foundation.
Thank you for your question. Health and research represent more or less 30% of the answer from our respondents. But it's true that we observe at the level of corporate foundation, and it's a study really focused on corporate foundation.
They have been over the last 3 years a big increase of the educational matter linked to employabilities, especially of young people. This is the main observation of these studies at the level of course, of the respondents to these studies. But still, health and research represent not a so little part. It's still more or less 30% of the respondents.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we take 2 or 3 points together, if we can build on them, Mario.
Mario from Portuguese Foundation Center. I would like to ask you both if you have identified any trend, if there is any, regarding the way that corporate foundations manage their project, both in funding and or operating project, in terms of partnership with other foundations, other corporate foundations, other foundations, non-corporate or other NGOs.
Hold that question over and see if we can go a few more.
Good afternoon. Pedro León Francia from KPMG Foundation Spain. My question is for Amanda. You have identified as one of the challenges the reluctance from trustees, considering that, in my personal opinion, good governance is possibly one of the main issues we have to tackle with in the next few years. Could you say a few words on this issue? Thank you.
Anyone else got another point to pull this together? So we've got about partnerships and we've got something on governance. Anyone else? You'll have another chance. Okay, so we'll deal with those. Amanda.
I'll address the partnership question first. Yes, I think it is a trend. It's still not common for foundations, be they general foundations or corporate foundations, to cooperate necessarily with others. But I think we're beginning to see this, particularly when it comes to addressing big global issues in perhaps an area like Africa. I can think of a few examples where some of the big mobile phone foundations are cooperating with other foundations to address issues in certain African countries. So I think it is there, definitely. And on the governance issue, I think the reluctance often comes from, and this is our experience and some of the comments that we receive, from an ignorance that many corporate foundation trustees have of what their responsibilities are, and an uncertainty about how far they can go in terms of engagement with the founding company. And so you will find different viewpoints, and so they get differing advice. But also, there are many companies who set up a foundation and don't think about ensuring that their trustees really understand what their duties are. Having said that, there are many charities where if you ask their trustees, they wouldn't even know that they're a trustee. So I'm afraid we're talking about an area where ignorance, I'm afraid, of responsibilities is quite common. But it's true in companies as well. And I think if you want a successful partnership, it's terribly important to ensure that your trustees really understand what their responsibilities as trustees are, how far they can go, and all of that. It's worth investing the time, whether they be company trustees or external trustees. Always invest time in proper induction.
I will answer on the question of partnership and the way corporate foundations do operate. I will answer for the French side only. Corporate foundations in France are much more funding partners than operators. In few cases, corporation has created foundation as to be an operational organization
For instance, I have example in the medical and social care. I have few examples, but most of them they are funders. But as the studies reveals and also Ramonda says, more and more they want to fund something very close to their preoccupation, to the role they want to have as a corporate citizenship. And also sometimes we have to say, because it's also linked or not so far from the business interest of the enterprise. And what is very interesting is that I have few examples of very large companies in France who has created endowments to develop public interest projects, but with a link with the company territories, or even with a link with some business activities of the enterprise. And in such a case, they are able to fund much more than when the activities are very far from the interest of the company, or very far from the skills of their employees. So, because we understood in these studies how it has become also strategic for enterprise to have a patronage which is very in line with their corporate social responsibility, or with their image, or with their history. The more they succeed in create links between business and patronage or social activities, the most enterprise will be able to fund a lot of money on that. And I'm also I am regarding the link with human resources. I saw a few large companies linking the foundation with the human resources manager, because the first will of the company was to involve employees and to respond also to expectation from their employees, and to keep the talents inside the companies. The company wants to answer this expectation from employees to be more responsible, to be more active as a social responsibility. And because they are not operators, of course they have developed partnership with the not-for-profit sector, and sometimes with other foundations, but we observe more widely with association as well, who do have an expertise on the project they want to support.
Thank you. This is certainly opening up the discussion that we're going to continue in the marketplace and the working groups. But one more question, maybe.
Thank you, Magdalena Pankowska from the Polish Donors Forum. I would like to ask one question about money to Ramonda, because in your latest research, over 30% of respondents identified a lack of funding as a key barrier to change. And I know that we don't have global data about the money which we have in the corporate foundation sector. We don't even have it in Poland, but as far as I observe, we can see it clearly in Poland that I could say the effectiveness is growing, but the budget's getting smaller. How do you see it in general? Is it a trend that we have more or less money in the corporate foundation sector and that we used to have before?
Thank you. Let's just hold that 1 second. Caroline, can you add another one on that? That's the question.
I was just interested, Caroline from I was just interested to share if successful entrepreneur that actually are establishing foundation that don't come the corporate foundations, because in terms of governance, in terms of mission, in terms of practice, they are almost completely separated, even in terms of source of funding by the corporate. So they keep the foundation separate, but actually all the expertise they put into is really much based on their entrepreneurial success. So I was just interested in
So
they are
there's
represented.
two issues here. One on the funding, which there's sort of this dilemma between what one sees as the potential of the long-term approach that foundations can take because of their status, but some are then subjected to short-term financing issues. And secondly, then in a new model with entrepreneurs identifying their philanthropic interest that is not linked in the formal way as a corporate foundation.
I think there's no doubt that we are in a challenging financial climate for everyone. But in the UK, corporate funding generally has continued to increase year on year for community, broader community. And that's reflected in terms of the corporate foundations. Having said that, it hasn't gone up significantly because it is a challenging environment. So, and undoubtedly, it came through. We should listen to what these foundations said. It is a very genuine issue. I think that there are more corporate foundations who think, in a sense, they have to make the business case to the company about why it's important for them to support them and to show that, which is, in my view, why foundations should be thinking about the impact that they have longer term, because there's nothing stronger in terms of a business case than being able to demonstrate the impact that you make. So if you have that sort of data, then that's data in business is what makes things happen. And so I think it's very important for foundations to think about how they're measuring their impact, I would argue. So the other issue was, sorry.
It was entrepreneurs.
Entrepreneurs.
The different
I think it's a very interesting trend, no doubt about it. There are some case studies in our report, one of which is eBay, which actually has gone down a more traditional route, but there are a number of technology entrepreneurs who are setting up their own foundations, which is absolutely right, but they're putting their business acumen through that. But I think there's another trend, which is the challenge to the model itself. There are others who say, we're interested in social change. I don't need to set up a foundation. I can just use social media to create a movement to create social change. So they don't need a foundation, they feel, to be able to do that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how far they can sustain that, but that's undoubtedly a trend. Having said that, some of the increase in terms of new foundations are coming from the retail sector, the brands that we know on the high street. They are setting up foundations, so it's not all about technology, but yeah, some interesting things happening. I wish we had global data. I wish we could collect global data. I really do. And if anybody knows how to, please let us know.
Very interesting.
And just to complete, I have no big data also in France, but it's interesting to observe also that when we observe family offices, there are recent figures that show that 15% of the funds they manage, they take care of, 15% of that are dedicated to philanthropy and venture philanthropy. It comes from this willing and I would say ADN of entrepreneurs. They keep this result
oriented approach, even for social matters, even for social objectives. And that's why there are benefits from both sides that corporations do develop partnership with the not-for-profit sector, foundation, association. They have to learn from each other. And corporate foundation do learn from the field expertise of the not-for-profit sector, and the corporate foundation have a lot to learn also in order to improve processes and even to fund tools that really are necessary to be more efficient, to have more capacity to monitor you need also to have some tools, and they are ready to fund for that.
Can I just make one very final point about funding, because I know how important that is. In my experience, the more data you have, the better. And that's certainly true in the UK. It's so important that ACF now collects this data. Because I know people who run corporate foundations in the UK who say, if you could tell us what others are doing, that means we can go to our chairman and chief executive and say, oh, but they're giving X percentage. So as much data as possible, because it does help to bring funding. So just wanted to share that. Very competitive.
As Amanda has touched on there, data is key, and at the minute it seems to be the only place that really has any data on its corporate foundation members are the national associations. They know their members. There's nothing beyond that, and they're able to support their members, as is the case with you. We know from our research within Daphne in various ways, largely around sharing experience, knowledge through their working groups and so on, information, good practice guides like the ACF one that's available online if you want to access that. I'm going to have to cut it there because I do want time for you to have a break before we go to the marketplace, and I want a moment to explain the marketplace before we do that. First of all, can I ask you to thank Amanda? I think that's been a really valuable introduction. I think there'll be some food for thought. But I haven't used this yet. And you're going to be sick of hearing this before too long, because I'm going to have to use it at the end of the coffee break to get you back in here, by which time I was going to say that this room will be transformed into a winter wonderland of a Christmas market. You'll have to use your imagination as best you can for that. It is going to be transformed in that there will be 7 stations around the room, marked by the flags. And if you can just congregate, and this will be the sort of the power of the crowd in itself. You're not going to be ordered anywhere. Try and disperse yourself fairly evenly around the stations, and then you'll have 10 minutes at each station, and then you'll hear the bell, and just move clockwise around the room from station to station. Thereby, we will have a conversation that everybody will have spoken, hopefully, to all of the stations, and the people at the stations will have had the opportunity to speak to everybody. Please pick up on the issues that have been raised here. Of course, we want to hear from you, your specific situation, but think of it in terms of how is this relevant to the relationship between the funding corporation and how the foundation operates. And that's the theme of the discussion. So we have 20 minutes for a coffee break, and I'll ring the bell, and then the marketplace will start.
White.